Let your gaze settle on a thin, patient brightness. Not a spark and not a flare. A penciled line against velvet, steady as breath, moving the way mind hands move when no one is watching. I follow it with you, tracing the sky's handwriting from one dim star to the next, then to the next, until the stroke becomes a path, and the path becomes a story. The night accepts our attention without asking for hurry. I keep my voice low and even. The room around us cools by a degree or two, or it only feels that way, because the mind has opened a window onto distance. The pale thread slides a little to the west. It does nothing dramatic. That's the point. Most of what's real out there arrives as quiet. Light teaches patience. A photon that left a red dwarf centuries ago finds your eye tonight and vanishes into meaning. Another skims dust, scatters and grows softer. A third strikes the thin veil around a small visitor and returns to us flavored by that meeting. You don't have to catch everyone. You only have to notice that the tone of the night is changing from charcoal to pewter, then to the dull silver that comes when the atmosphere steadies and the stars relax into pinpoints again. I breathe with the seam of that silver. The thread is where a traveller crosses our field, a visitor more distant than it looks, its motion a trick of geometry and time. Telescopes learned a long while ago to find such motion by subtraction. Night after night, frame after frame, the sky is the same until one faint streak refuses to stay put. We tag the streak, we measure its change, and we begin to guess at its shape, which is another way of saying we begin to learn its past. The past of interstellar wanderers is written in the grammar of light. Some arrive so dry that their faces do not sweat in sunlight. Some simmer at a distance and unfurl veils that grow for weeks. Dust takes the sun's push and sweeps into a soft arc. Ions take the wind and draw a straighter line. Even in this first, simple watching, you can imagine both a curved hush and a direct hush, one shaped by brightness itself, the other by charged breath from our star. The thread we follow might someday show one, or both, or neither, and all of those possibilities are gentle. There is comfort in the scale. Between points of light hang long rooms where nothing touches, not really. Even when an object glides near, near is a word that belongs to storytelling more than to hazard. The earth stays well within its protective rhythms, wrapped in a field that peels particles away and turns them into curtains at the poles. You can rest your shoulders knowing that most alignments are simpler than headlines, more like two birds crossing lines of sight than like any meeting at all. When I speak of a pale thread, I mean a practice too. The practice of choosing a single faint thing and letting it have your attention long enough for calm to build a floor under it. That kind of looking becomes its own light. It slows the jaw. It loosens the hands. The sky answers by becoming less crowded and more exact. If your eyes are closed, the thread can be a quiet arc inside the head, the after-image that lingers when a candle is blown out, and you can still trace where it was. I think about how surveys comb the night with a patience that no one person could sustain, making a film strip of change that runs for years. I think about the first time we realized one of these changes meant from another star, and how it did not roar when it arrived. It slid through a small field in a single instrument's evening, unassuming, almost shy. In the way of starlight, significance came later. That lesson, quiet arrival, later meaning, suits sleep. We can let go of urgency because the sky never asked for it. The thread brightens and dims a touch as air currents thin, as a gust 1,000 kilometers away rises and falls, and the wave of it hums through the column above us. Our instruments note the small changes. We don't need to. We are here for the tone of the night, more than the numbers. If a name is needed, we'll use it softly. If no name is needed, the motion is still true. The mind is good at naming. The body is better at resting, given half a chance and a simple thing to follow. There is a moment, and it comes in every watch, when the background stops shimmering and the subject sits. It is like a dimmer switch has paused between clicks and the gradient smooths out. That is where we are now. The thread keeps its heading. The stars around it hold their points. Somewhere far beyond what the eye can promise, gravity does what gravity does, and sunlight counts its own minutes on grains of dust we will never see. That is enough. It's more than enough. It's the peace that comes from letting the universe be slow. If you find a thought tugging for attention, let it take the thread's pace. A small thought, a longer breath. A small thought, a longer breath. In the span of 3 or 4 of those, the room settles into a softer darkness, and the mind, reassured, steps back from the window just a little. The object out there keeps going whether we watch or not. The gift of watching is for us. I'll stay with you as the line becomes a line you can hold in memory. The contour is gentle, from left to right, slight decline, a patient brightness balanced between 2 quieter stars. If someone else were watching from a different yard, their line would be different. That's part of the charm. The sky is a commons. The views are personal. When you lie back, the ceiling carries a faint echo of that motion, as if the light itself had written a lullaby in a key that favors slow heartbeats and warm hands. The thread thins, the eye relaxes and finds it again. It thins once more. This is how we say goodnight to the first sign of a story that might grow, might stay small, might teach nothing except patience. Each of those options ends with you sleeping well, which is all the cosmos asks of us this hour. And as the brightness eases toward the color of your breath in a dark room, the sky lets go of the line and keeps its promise of quiet. The silver cools to blue, and then to something softer still. Color dissolves, and the thread becomes the room's hush. The night has a metronome, and I let the instrument set it. The CCD cooler hums at a steady pitch, the fan a softer harmony beneath it. A shutter whispers open, the tone of the room shifts, and the pixels begin their quiet chorus of counting. 30 seconds, 60, 90. Each exposure length is just a different tempo. When the shutter closes, a brief click lands like a drum rim. I like to imagine the camera as a careful listener, ear pressed to the dark. It listens for faint syllables of light, then another, then a cluster, and writes them as numbers in a staff of rows and columns. Before we listen to the sky, we listen to the instrument itself. Bias frames capture the baseline hiss. Dark frames record the thermal murmur at the sensor's temperature. Flat fields learn the microphone's shape, the way dust and optics color the tone. Only after that tuning do we let the universe in. Survey telescopes keep time together. Atlas sweeps with short, repeating bars. ZTF plays a broader chord with its wide field. Pan-STARRS holds notes longer and deeper. Their pipelines subtract last night's song from tonight's, and what remains, the new note, the moving note, is flagged. 3 detections make a motif. Link 2 motifs and you have a tracklet. Link tracklets and you have a melody we call an orbit. Behind the scenes, software like MOPS does the counting and the clapping. On our side of the screen, it looks like a gentle green check mark that says the rhythm holds. Spectrographs are different listeners. Where the imager counts brightness, the spectrograph separates pitch. Carbon chains sing in broad bands. Cyanogen has a distinctive high note. Oxygen whispers a narrow green at 557.7 nanometers. Even a sparse spectrum tells you whether you're hearing sunlight reflected off dust or emissions from gas excited by the sun's energy. Low-resolution instruments, the kind that ride on many mid-sized telescopes, can hum along at modest resolving power and still catch the melody of a coma. High-resolution instruments can pick out the fine harmonics, tiny shifts that trace outflow speeds or the temperature of the gas. Photometry lays down the beat. Magnitudes fall and rise with distance to the sun and to Earth, and with the phase angle, the way the light is slanted. We keep a steady tempo by measuring standard stars, then tap the same tempo on the target. When comet dust thickens, the curve brightens and the beat grows stronger. When activity wanes, the line softens. Comet observers have a favorite measure called alpha, a single number that captures how assertively the dust is scattering light in a chosen aperture. Isn't perfect, but it's a reliable bar to compare performances across nights and instruments. Between telescope sessions, another section of the orchestra plays from a far stage. Space weather monitors at L1, Discovia and ACE listen to the solar wind in real time. The magnetometers there hear the interplanetary field tilt south or north. Particle counters record when the flow quickens, when it quiets. On Earth, magnetometer chains translate those flows into a baseline called Ka. None of this is danger music tonight. It's just the background groove that every comet tail keeps time with, even when we're asleep. There is a comfort in the repetition. Focus, acquire, expose, read out, store, calibrate, subtract, divide, fit. The ritual softens the shoulders because the steps are as predictable as a lullaby. Numbers do arrive: exposure time, air mass, seeing in arc seconds, signal to noise, and I will keep them tidy for another hour, but for now, their presence is just a pulse to relax into. They keep us honest. They also keep us calm. I speak softly because the detectors are doing delicate listening. A gust across the dome is a cymbal brush. A passing car on a distant road is a far drum. None of it drowns the sky, because the sky's song drifts on a scale outside human hearing, collected not as sound, but as patient counts that we later translate back into meaning, the way you might translate sheet music into warmth in the chest. When a moving point crosses 3 frames in a straight, unhurried line, I don't feel surprise. I feel recognition, the way you recognize a familiar rhythm at the first measure. If you're lying down, let the steps turn into a personal cadence. Inhale on, acquire. Exhale on, expose. Inhale on, close. Exhale on, save. Let the pace lengthen with each pair. The mind often wants to leap to conclusions, but instruments are good teachers. They only play what they hear. They are immune to urgency and gossip. They repeat the same listening until the pattern emerges on its own. That is a kind of kindness. Spectral lines, even faint ones, arrive like bells no one rushes to ring. A narrow notch here means sunlight scattered by dust that reddens the continuum. A rise there means a molecule caught and re-emitting energy. If the night grants us a trace of oxygen's green, it's because sunlight and simple chemistry have conspired to tune that note, not because anything out of the ordinary has lifted a hand. Most nights, the tale is this plain. The sun plays, the visitor answers, we record. I lean on ephemerides the way a musician leans on a chart. JPL Horizons prints the measures ahead, where to point and when. Uncertainty bars like gentle rests in the score. If our measurement lands a beat to the left, we check our timing before rewriting the sheet. Was the guide star centered? Was the focus settled? Were the flats fresh or left over from a night with a different lamp? The checklist is not drama, it's rhythm. Done. Slowly, it unknots the worry in the jaw. Later, when we bring tonight's data together with last week's, the fuller arrangement appears. The light curve settles into a phrase that repeats. The color index holds steady within errors. The spectrum's main notes stay where they belong, shifting only with geometry. And even when something small changes, a brightening by a half magnitude, a subtle swing in tail direction, the record begins with the listening itself, with the tools that do not tire and the patience that our bodies borrow from them when we can. This is why I stay with you through the routine. The routine is the refuge. What I love most is the handoff between sections of the orchestra. Imager to spectrograph, ground to space, survey to follow up. If one has a sore throat, clouds, wind, maintenance, the others keep the time for a while. Knowledge accumulates not because a single instrument shouts, but because many instruments hum the same line across weeks. And in their agreement, we find a steadiness that is good for sleep and good for science. And in the second half of the night, when the dome is warmer, the chair a little softer, and the numbers a little kinder, I let myself hold one long breath as the exposure ticks down, because there is a special quiet that lives in the last 5 seconds of a good frame, an earned hush that reminds me everything important about this object can be learned by listening carefully and not much else. No chase, no clamour, just steady ears and time. The shutter closes, the spectrograph ticks once. Why do comet tails point away? Because in this part of space, there is a steady current, and small things drift with it. The sun sends a continuous flow of charged particles outward. That flow is called the solar wind, and an active comet becomes a tiny vessel in that stream. Gas that the sun ionizes is caught by the current and drawn downstream. Dust, freed from ice, is nudged by sunlight and by the same broad flow, but it keeps more of the comet's own path, curving like a wake behind a boat, turning gently across a river. Does every comet have one tail or two? Often two. The ion tail is the cleaner wake, a straighter line that points almost directly away from the sun. It forms when ultraviolet light strips electrons from molecules, leaving ions that the solar wind carries along. The dust tail is the broader wake, a pale fan that bends because grains of different sizes feel the push of sunlight and the river of space in different ways. You can picture the comet as a quiet hull. Gas traces the current, dust trails the route already sailed. Why does the ion tail look so straight? The wind has a guide of its own. It threads the space between planets with magnetic field lines, and the plasma that leaves the comet follows those lines the way floating seed fluff follows a steady tide. When a gust passes, a coronal mass ejection, the tidy wake can break and reconnect. A clean disconnection that shows the current changed. The river shifts, The wake resets, the vessel continues. And the curve of the dust, that is the turn of the boat and the push of light together. Bigger grains are heavier and linger nearer the path the nucleus sails. Smaller grains are lighter and are blown farther outward. Over hours and days, those grains sort themselves along graceful sheets that modelers map like contour lines on a nautical chart. It isn't drama. It's simple seamanship across very wide water. If tales point away, why do pictures sometimes show them skewed? Because we are not always standing square to the channel. We watch from a bank set off to the side. Perspective tips the wake, and the angle between sun, comet, and earth, the phase angle, decides how the shape reads to our eyes. When the wind strengthens or slackens, the line sharpens or softens. When the comet rotates, jets point in new directions and the fan shifts its spread. Yet, the rule holds. Downstream is away from the sun, even when the view is slanted. Is any of this a hazard to us? No. These wakes are vast, but whisper thin. The gas is more empty than the best vacuum we can make in a lab, and the dust is a fine, diluted spray. A tail can run for millions of kilometers, yet its particles are so sparse that a room like yours contains more atoms in a single breath. Earth carries its own harbor wall, a magnetic field that turns most charge flow aside toward the poles. From there, all that may happen is a quiet light at high latitudes while the rest of the world sleeps. If the current is constant, why do tails sometimes kink or fade? Because the river has weather. A new burst from the sun changes the field for a day or two. The comet's own vents can open or close as sunlight reaches different faces. When a small fragment breaks away, fresh ice meets the wind, and the wake looks briefly fuller. Then the pace returns to its norm, and the long downstream settles again. The basic seamanship never changes. Here we set our oars down for a minute. Room air slips along the floor and up the curtains. The faintest hum from a charger rises and falls, then disappears into the quiet. Outside, a single car takes a distant bend and is gone. You may feel the bedding warm at your shoulders and the weight in your hands grow pleasantly simple. Let the jaw loosen. Let the breath lengthen. Think of open water on a windless day and a slow vessel keeping a straight, patient course past green banks you will never need to name. Do tails ever point toward the sun? Not really. Small portions can appear to, briefly, when a jet is angled our way or when perspective swings the fan across our line of sight. But the downstream rule is faithful. Even when the comet's track loops around the sun, the ion wake keeps leaning outward, and the dust wake traces the boat's earlier sweep, a curve that tells the story of turns already made. It is a comfort to learn that much of the sky's motion is simply a record of a journey through a steady current, uncomplicated and kind to sleepers. And if you notice a long, easy sentence here, it is because some ideas deserve a wide, unbroken surface, like a calm water path that asks for nothing more than a hull to glide across it, and the patience to let the banks pass in their own time while you rest, and the night takes you where you were already going. If the comet keeps its wake and the river keeps its pace, what gently changes next? Postcard in time. Late October, just before dawn. The air has that thin, polished feeling a few hours after midnight, when traffic has given up, and the city is a cat asleep on the warm side of the house. I lean toward the window of the sky and hold a simple snapshot. The visitor nearest to the sun. It will ever be for us, not rushing, not stalling, just tracing its small part of the great curve that planets and comets share. Perihelion is only a word for nearest. It does not imply heat we can feel or danger we must name. At this point in the path, sunlight presses more strongly on ice and dust. The surface exhales a little more. The halo looks slightly fuller in long exposures. The rest is geometry, and geometry is kind to sleepers. Most of the time, nearest to the sun still means far beyond any sensible measure of near to Earth, a postcard distance, real, exact, and comfortably removed. I hold the picture steady and keep the scale honest. Between us and the visitor stretches a fabric of space that feels empty, but is in fact stitched with fields and tides. The heliospheric wind threads one way, the comet's motion threads another, and the two together weave the faint pattern we call the tail. On this date it is thinner, a little cleaner, as if the loom had been tightened for a moment. The ion strand pulls straight away from the sun's loom bar. The dust strand curves across the warp of its orbit. The weave is delicate, but it is also predictable, and predictability is soothing. You might imagine the sun as the bright shuttle passed back and forth, sending light that tugs on grains and excites gas to glow. That image is enough. It doesn't need drama. The shuttle never stops. The fabric grows across the years, whether a comet is close or far, whether we are looking or sleeping. When a body swings nearest, the threads show up better in our instruments. That's all. What changes for us is clarity, not hazard. If perihelion were a sound, it would be the soft click of a loom when a pattern repeats, a signal that the next row will lie neatly atop the last. We mark the moment in notebooks and in code. The ephemeris prints the time down to seconds. The chart shows the angle between sun, comet, and Earth. The expected brightness is penciled in. Observers love neat margins, and perihelion gives us one. It arrives. It sits precisely where celestial mechanics said it would, and then it goes on. The calm is in the keeping of that promise. I step back from the single frame and let several nights stack in my mind the way prints might pile on a desk, the edges offset so that each image peeks through like layers of muslin. The tail stitch arcs a little differently from night to night, a gentle bias that says the nucleus is rotating and sunlight is walking across new surface. The coma's hem brightens by a small amount, then settles. If a fragment separates, the pattern grows speckled for a while, and then returns to smooth. None of this is unusual. It is the ordinary craft of a comet, near its most sunlit point, a pattern you could embroider without rushing. There is a pleasure in naming the forces, and then letting them fade to background. Sublimation loosens grains. Radiation pressure sorts them by size. The interplanetary magnetic field gathers ions into a narrow filament. Each term is a thread through cloth, specific and simple. And when you know where each one lies, the whole panel makes sense without needing constant attention. You can rest with that. You can even drift, because nothing in this scene demands alertness beyond curiosity. From Earth, the phase angle shapes the postcard. When the angle is small, dust can seem brighter, as tiny grains scatter light strongly toward the observer. When the angle grows, the fan thins in our view. Near perihelion, the angle often changes quickly from night to night, so the look of the coma and tail shifts more than the physics underneath. This is the kind of change that is gentle enough to watch the way you would watch someone sewing in lamplight, the hand moving, the fabric settling, the rhythm unbroken. I make room here for reassurance, because a date can pull on nerves even when nothing warrants it. Perihelion is routine, and routine in the sky is a gift. It means we are not improvising defences or revising charts in a hurry. It means the visitor is an exquisite but ordinary maker of light, one more contributor to the long quilt of things that circle, flare a little, and depart. Earth's magnetic shield is the firm backing to that quilt, turning charged threads aside so they decorate the polar edges and leave the centerpieces quiet. In a room like yours, the only relevant field is the kindly one that holds your blankets in place. If you like, imagine the path ahead and the path behind as two borders stitched in different colours. The border behind is dust, a fading fringe that records where the nucleus has been across recent days. The border ahead is intent, purely gravitational, a curve no hand can feel but every model can place. At perihelion, the borders meet at a neat corner on the pattern, and after that the lines diverge again, past the same motifs in reverse order. You can fall asleep to that certainty, the way a child might trace a fingertip along a familiar quilt and know where the next square lies by touch alone. For a moment, I consider the first Interstellar visitor we caught in this era, and how its postcard of perihelion looked nothing like a typical comet's. Then the second, whose card was wonderfully plain. Those past pages help set our expectations without fixing them, the way a swatch book suggests a palette, without forbidding a new shade. Our present visitor will send its own card. The sky is generous like that. I keep the camera's interval gentle and the notes compact. If a value matters later, it will wait for me on the screen. For now, the picture is the thing. A small, clean loop at the sunward end of a long arc, a faint veil brighter than last week, the anti-sunward thread a touch crisper. I let my attention settle on the seam where coma meets tail, because there the physics becomes visual in a way no equation can rival, and because pausing on a seam is a good way to slow a night that might otherwise run ahead of the body. And in that pause, while the room holds steady and the sky holds steady and my voice stays level, the mind lets go of count and measure and keeps only the image, which is the whole point at this hour. An uncomplicated picture that will still be true when you wake. The world having moved one stitch forward in a textile so broad we can only love the portion within reach and trust the rest to keep its shape. At 02:14, the postcard tucks itself back into the album. The fabric lies flat. The room remembers how to breathe. Listen with me. Not for words, but for textures of quiet. The room has its own small orchestra, a low HVAC murmur, the shy tick of a wall clock, the linen sift when you shift your weight. Beneath it, imagined, yet true, the sun breathes outward. That breath is the solar wind. It is not a noise your ear can catch, but if calm had a current, this would be its hush. Close to the star, the wind leaves hot and fast. By the time it reaches Earth's orbit, it is relaxed into a steady exhale. Instruments far from this pillow hear its character as numbers, speed in kilometers per second, density in particles per cubic centimeter, magnetic field in nanotesla. To me, tonight, it is a long-held tone. When the tone is smooth, auroras idle near the poles and satellites fly without complaint. When the tone roughens, when the field turns south and stays, Earth's magnetic shell answers with a deeper note that engineers and aurora chasers both know how to read. Upstream sits a small choir of listeners. Spacecraft at a point between Sun and Earth keep their ears to the flow. One hears the wind speed tick from 350 to 500 and back again. Another hears the field angle lean downward for an hour. These are soft cues, not alarms. Think of them as a gentle shift from flute to oboe, a change in timbre that tells us what kind of sky music is on its way. It takes about an hour for that music to cross the gap from monitors to magnetosphere. Plenty of time for a breath in and a longer one out. Down here, we use different microphones. Chains of magnetometers run under long stretches of land. Their needles drift a little when currents high above strengthen or fade. A composite of those drifts becomes a single digit from 0 to 9 that forecasters give the world. Lower numbers are quiet corridors. Higher numbers invite curtains of light to walk south. Neither number belongs to fear, only to preparation. Turn off what you don't need. Save your work early. Then let the night do what nights do. I keep our story near the instrument table, because where some hear mystery, the devices hear weather. A coronal hole on the sun's surface opens a valve, and a faster stream arrives 2 or 3 days later. A mass ejection lifts and sails. If it faces us, its leading edge can reach our magnetic field in a day or in 3, depending on the launch. The shell compresses, lines of force reconnect, energy spills into the upper air, and the oval of aurora brightens. None of that steps into your room except as a headline. And we are not collecting headlines here. We are collecting rest. The traveller we've been following lives inside this same song. Its ion tail is a long, pale whistle, tuned by the wind's pitch. When the pitch changes, the line can quiver or snap and form anew. You could call those snaps chords, brief and clean. They are not danger to us. They are how the comet's halo keeps time with the sun. Dust is another instrument entirely, soft percussion lifted by light. And even that percussion is too faint to reach your ear as anything but relief. There is something soothing about regularities. 11-year solar cycles rise and fall like slow crescendos. High-speed streams repeat with the sun's rotation, a familiar refrain every few weeks. Substorms, the smaller dramas within bigger storms, often start with a quieting, as if the system inhales before it plays the bright part. If you've ever felt yourself sink into sleep after recognizing the first bars of a favorite piece, you understand how prediction turns worry into ease. Let's lean into the lull. Imagine the wind as a 1,000-mile-long ribbon of soft static. Imagine the magnetosphere as a patient drum that answers only when struck just so. Most of the time, the taps are light, tap and gone, and the drum barely speaks. On stronger nights, the drum hums a little, mostly in the polar loft, where charged rain paints the air with silent greens and reds. Even then, the hum is a sky sound for people standing under cold stars, not a thing that enters your house. Here, in this half-circle of lamp shadow and blanket, the hum becomes a reason to soften your jaw and let your hands fall open. Some of the wind's structure is braided with waves. Alphenic ripples carry rhythm down the lines of the field, the way a finger sends a tremor down a string. You don't need the math to feel their kindness. They mean that even in a vacuum, continuity exists, that one end of a system can speak to another in a language of gentle undulation. Tonight, they say very little. That's perfect. Nights of little say are the ones we sleep best through. Engineers who tend satellites carry a set of quiet habits. Ground when geomagnetic notes deepen. Schedule critical maneuvers away from rough hours. Build margins into electronics so a stray particle is an event, not a crisis. The habits are a comfort to me because they mean even on noisy days, lives proceed without a hitch. Your part in this is easier. Breathe evenly. Notice how your ribs expand and return. Turn the screen down. Let the room cool by a degree. Call that your space weather protocol, gentle and sufficient. Towards the middle of night, there is often a thinning. Data lines flatten. The upstream monitors report softer values. The auroral oval contracts. It is a musical rest, and because it arrives after numbers that moved, it feels earned. In that earned rest, I often place a long sentence, the sort that goes on and on like a low pedal tone beneath a choir, so you can settle your attention on how the voice holds steady across many measures. And it becomes obvious that steadiness itself is a form of care, not just for the machines and the models that trace the flow of charged breath across the deep, but for your own body, as it lets the day's currents circulate out and leaves only a warm center where sleep can anchor. You and I are small, lucky listeners. We're close enough to hear the instruments, far enough to keep the concert at a pleasant volume. On most calendars, space weather is a blank square. I like it that way. The blank leaves room for the quiet things to be noticed. The way a bedside fan lowers the room's key. The way a distant truck passes and does not return. The way the very act of listening for something large that never quite arrives becomes its own drowsy cadence. Stay here while the levels fall another notch. Let the upstream numbers idle. Let the poles dim their curtains. Let the traveller's tale take the key of the wind and keep it without strain. I will leave you with a minute of stillness, a small field recording of nothing in particular. Air against the vent, fabric settling, a heartbeat under your ear that matches the room. The instruments agree, the sky agrees, the pillow agrees. We can let the sound run by itself now. A low hush settles between instruments, a slow breathing of metal and night. Begin close. Imagine holding a single dust grain on the tip of a finger you cannot feel. It is smaller than a hair's width, jagged like frost, half rock, half ice. Sunlight touches it, and a whisper of vapor lifts from tiny hollows, the way a chill morning lets a garden exhale. Around that grain, in a shell that would fit inside a teacup, molecules release and escape. They do not make a sound, they make a mist. Under cold sunshine, the nucleus loosens more of these motes. Water ice gives way nearer to the sun. Carbon dioxide and carbon. Monoxide can release farther out, so the first haze may be these quicker, colder vapors. Jets form where sunlight reaches fresh patches. A puff here, then there, builds a cushion of gas that pushes grains free. The smallest lift first. Larger ones hesitate, then slide into motion. All of it is thin. All of it is patient. The coma, the word for this glow, begins as breath around a stone. Back your view away by a few kilometers. What was teacup small has grown room-sized, then city-sized. Gas is racing outward at hundreds of meters per second, dust at slower speeds of meters to tens of meters per second, and collisions are rare enough to count only in models. The mist expands until sunlight and geometry decide what we can see. Close to the nucleus, grains reflect a warm, faint beige. Farther out, the cloud thins into transparency you can only measure, not really see. If the nucleus rotates, the jets sweep like slow sprinkler arms, tracing faint fans into the ever-widening fog. Another step back, and you begin to see structure. Dust does not fill the space evenly. Larger bits hang closer, making the inner haze a touch denser. Smaller ones outrun them and spread like the thinnest fog over a valley. Sunlight prefers to scatter forward through these small grains, so when the angle is right, the coma brightens, as if the air itself decided to glow. It is still just mist, common, physical, comforting in its obedience to light, but the eye reads it as a softening of the night. Farther still, and the solar wind's direction becomes the organizing breeze. Ions, born from sunlight stripping electrons, slip into the flow and are carried away in a straighter plume. Dust listens mostly to light, ions mostly to wind, and the two mists part company. The place where they separate can look like a seam, feathery and easily disturbed, as if a distant hand stroked the fog and left a track that slowly fills. When a solar gust arrives, the straight plume can break and reform, a fog bank torn by an unseen eddy, then repaired by steady flow. There is no need to imagine thickness. Even at its most active, a comet's coma is more empty than any room you have known. You could travel millions of meters through that halo and find only a trace upon your instruments, a handful of molecules in a volume that would hold oceans of air at sea level. That thinness is part of its grace. The coma is a lesson in how almost nothing can become something you can point to, how mist, given time and light, becomes a visible companion to a tiny world. Let's rest a moment in the room while the picture holds. You might sense the faintest draft along the floor, like cool air pooling in a hollow, then drifting past. Fabric settles. A small appliance's indicator dims. If you look toward the window, the glass has its own breath, a slight gradient where night presses on one side and quiet warmth on the other. None of this asks you to do anything. It asks only that. You recognize the forms of mist near at hand, so the far mists seem familiar, which is a gentle way to lower the mind's guard and let it float where it wants to, a light fog over still water. Now widen again to thousands of kilometers. The coma shades into tail, dust arcs into a miles-deep veil that bends along the path the nucleus has walked, a long, faint fog bank shaped by sunlight's firm push. If you could look edge-on, you'd see layers like the leaves of a book, each layer a time when the jets were a little stronger or the angle to the sun a little kinder. Look face on, and the veil is a fan. With patience, you can see that this fan remembers where the nucleus has been, the way morning fog remembers the valleys it rose from. The remembering carries no omen. It is just the shape of the past, suspended. Inside the haze, chemistry works at a pace you can fall asleep to. H2O turns to OH under ultraviolet light. CN sings in blue. C2 sways in green bands that the camera favors. The numbers behind these changes are as calm as the processes themselves. A few hundred meters per second for gas leaving the surface. A few meters per second for grains. Production rates that rise smoothly with sunlight and fall with distance. And nothing in those rates leans toward surprise. Even when a crack opens and a brighter plume starts, it is the fog brightening where the sun has found a new pocket to warm, not a storm brewing. I want one long, easy thought to carry you across this wider view, so let it be this. From the tiny frost-edged shard near the nucleus to the city-sized breath around it, and all the way out to the pale bending veil that trails for unthinkable distances, the same quiet rules apply. Sunlight warms, ice loosens, gas lifts grains. Grains drift and settle into forms that light can reveal. And while the details change with composition, temperature, and angle, nothing in this mist is abrupt, in the way that startles the body from rest, because the entire display is simply the slow choreography of evaporation in a vacuum, a dance so gentle that instruments must stretch themselves to see it, and we, lucky onlookers, are free to admire it without needing to brace. Should an interstellar visitor carry more of the colder ices, its first breath of fog might start a bit farther from the sun. Should it carry less, its coma may stay modest, even near warmth. Both are ordinary within the family of comets we've known. The charm of watching is not in catching an exception. It is in seeing how consistently mist finds its shape in light. You do not have to solve for it tonight. You only have to allow the image to settle and keep you company until sleep is ready to arrive on its own schedule. From grain to halo to tail, the camera's counts tick in the background. I will file them later. For now, the numbers are like dew beading along a railing, evidence of a simple process carried out in quiet air. They accumulate without hurry. They mean exactly what they seem to mean. And as they do, your breath evens, the room cools a shade, and the wide fog of space keeps its form, the count steady, and, if the path lines up, the journey remains gentle. If a straight line ties sun, traveller, and earth for a while, the meaning is mostly geometric, like 3 milestones that happen to fall along the same country road. If the traveller is breathing a little more from sunlight, then its trail grows clearer to telescopes, and that clarity is of eyes and instruments, not for worry. If we imagine Earth somewhere along the extended route of particles and light that leave the visitor, then most of what continues along that route keeps going past us without incident, because space between waypoints is still wide and thin. If light is sent, it arrives first. Its schedule is brisk, a courier that never tires. It carries images, and sometimes it carries stories told as radio. And in either form, it says what it always says. Here is how bright I am. Here is how my colour shifts with dust and gas. Here is how my faint halo looks when you stand along my line of travel. If the line is especially tidy for a night or two, we may see a stronger reflection or a neat forward glow, like sunlight flashing from a distant window on a long road. And then the route turns a little and the flash is gone. If particles follow, they keep a slower itinerary. They leave the traveller in a steady convoy, sorting themselves by weight and charge, guided by the same rules that shape tails in every orbit. They do not fill the road behind. They dot it, a sparse procession that thins as it goes. If an alignment places us near that procession's extension, our own magnetic boundary greets the travellers at the outskirts and guide most around, as it always does. At the poles, the sky may write a brief note in colour. In the middle latitudes, night stays night. The map for sleepers remains unchanged. If a gust from the sun shares the road on the same night, it keeps its own schedule and its own reasons. Sometimes 2 caravans overtake each other near the same crossroads, and the landscape seems busier than usual. Interpreting which wagon raised which dust is something forecasters handle by comparing paths already drawn. For the rest of us, the best travel habit is simple. Keep routine, secure what needs securing, and leave the big sky to its traffic while you tend to rest. If we stand at the window and imagine outcomes, the map offers only mild ones. A satellite might log a hiccup and then continue. A distant auroral arc might wander a little farther than expected before it folds back toward the usual route. A radio dish might catch a momentary brightening and write it in the logbook with a small circle, a note to check again at the next pass. The road doesn't deliver drama to the doorstep, it delivers data to the desk. If the alignment coincides with a change in the traveller, that change will almost always be local to the traveller. A new vent opens, a patch of darker surface turns towards sunlight. A fragment drifts free and takes a neighbouring lane. Those are familiar departures and arrivals within a single journey, the kinds of detours we know how to read later from light curves and images. If they occur while 3 milestones share a line, they are easier to study, not harder to live with. The grace in this is that geometry favours understanding without demanding vigilance. If your mind looks for the edge cases, because minds are curious travellers, then let it walk a few steps and return. Suppose a stronger solar burst passes by somewhere along the highway. People who watch the sun will already have marked it, and its timing at Earth follows the timetable they publish. Suppose the traveller's trail grows a little denser for a night. Observers scattered along longitudes will share notes and fit the change to rotation and distance. Suppose 2 small coincidences overlap. The maps we keep allow us to trace each back to its own mile markers later, which is one more reason to rest now, rather than drive yourself through guesswork. If you prefer a picture rather than a plan, imagine a long road across a plain. The sun is a bright town to one side. Earth is a quiet inn along the road with lanterns on the porch. The traveller is a cart that rolls past the far horizon, leaving a faint, powdery trace that wind spreads thin. On some evenings, the lanterns line up with the road, and the cart's trace lies exactly in sight of the porch. You might notice the trace more clearly that night. You might even see a brief shimmer where dust catches light. Then the cart moves on. The trace settles. The lanterns return to lighting the porch and nothing beyond. If numbers are your comfort, they wait in the ledger. We don't need them here. The principles are old and reliable. Light takes the express route. Charged breath rides the stream set by the star. Dust keeps to a slower lane, watched over by brightness itself. Earth's boundary is a firm checkpoint that has worked for longer than any story we can tell. These are not cliff roads without guardrails. They are straight stretches over open ground, and the signs have been there for ages. If there's a thought that tries to run ahead, what if, let it find a pace that matches footsteps along a familiar sidewalk at dusk. Step, step, softer step. Step, step, softer step. The alignment, if it happens to be tidy on a certain night, is an address that helps instruments meet their subject. A meeting in a well-lit plaza with maps in every pocket. It is not an unmarked path through woods. The map makes the walk shorter, not stranger, and when the meeting ends, everyone goes home by the same streets they used to get there. If you want a single carry-through thought to take you the rest of the way toward sleep, keep this one. Alignments are waypoints, not cliffs, and the quiet rules that guard our planet's route through the star's wide district continue to apply before, during, and after any neat geometry we draw on paper, which means your own route through this night can stay as simple as pillow to breath to drift, a straight path with no turns. You need to remember and know crossroads that require a choice, because the sky is very good at travelling on without our help, and better still, at letting us rest while it does. If the milestones share a line, then we note it. If they don't, we note that too. Either way, the journey is patient, the maps are clear, and the road is kind to sleepers. That is enough for tonight. I like stairs with a good handrail. 3 solid grips and the climb becomes easy. Tonight, history offers exactly that. 3 rails my fingers can rest on while we descend into calm. First handrail, October 19th, 2017. A survey telescope in Hawaii, Pan-STARRS 1, flags a speck moving too fast and too straight to belong here. We learn its new name, ʻOumuamua, and the I means interstellar. Its path is hyperbolic, eccentricity greater than 1, the unmistakable geometry of a visitor that won't stay. Follow-up measurements show a faint, sun-driven push not explained by gravity alone, the whisper of activity so subtle that no obvious coma appears in the images. It came and went fast, a clean glide past the sun and out again, teaching us that not every traveller will wear a bright veil, and that quiet objects can still leave a measurable trace in the numbers. That grip holds firm. Second handrail, August 30th, 2019. A backyard-built telescope on Crimea finds a different kind of messenger. 2I Borisov looks like a comet from the first photographs, diffuse head, short tail, and keeps looking that way under bigger mirrors. Spectra show familiar bands. Dust production behaves like dust production should. By perihelion in December, it is the sort of object textbooks prepared us for. It even sheds fragments near the end of its visit, as many comets do, and it becomes a pale echo of the ordinary amid the extraordinary fact of having crossed between stars. Where the first rail told us not to count on a tail, this one tells us not to count it out either. Both rails are steady. Third handrail, the naming scheme itself. After 1I and 2I comes 3I, whoever earns it. The I isn't a mood, it's a rule. The minor planet center tallies orbits, confirms the hyperbola, and only then stamps that letter beside the numeral, the quiet signature of the sky's bookkeeping. By the time an object wears that badge, many instruments have already touched its path. A survey telescope to discover, a queue of others to refine position, a few spectrographs to test for gas, and the background hum of space weather monitors to set the scene. Procedure is a handrail too. With these grips in place, expectations settle. Interstellar visitors are diverse. Some arrive with little to no visible outgassing and still feel a non-gravitational push. Others make textbook Comet and tails, green bands where carbon molecules shine and narrow oxygen lines where sunlight shakes atoms into emitting. All have orbits that open outward forever. All pass at distances that instruments celebrate and people sleep through. The spread of behavior inside those boundaries is wide enough to keep astronomers curious and narrow enough to keep your room quiet. I reach for details because facts are the grain in the wood of a good rail. ʻOumuamua's brightness rose and fell without the telltale fuzz of a coma. That absence became its story. Borisov's dust reflected light in a way that changed gently with geometry and distance. Those changes fit the family of comets we already knew, even as some ratios of gases hinted at a different recipe. Both objects were first found by watchers meant to find other things. Near-Earth asteroids, moving lights among fixed stars. And both were instantly folded into a routine that has become second nature. Measure, predict, confirm, publish, move on to the next night. What do these rails say about any new stair we might step down? They say, expect difference in the details and similarity in the big frame. Expect a track you can plot nights in advance. Expect faintness that rewards patience, not drama. Expect that geometry, sun here, visitor there, Earth watching from one side, will explain most of what you see. Expect that when something unusual appears, the first answer will be calibration and the second will be physics. You already understand applied in a slightly new proportion. I keep my voice level as we slide a palm along each rail again. First, a visitor can be dry to the eye and still feel sunlight's pressure or release gas too gently to glow. Second, a visitor can be thoroughly cometary, making dust and gas that trace solar wind and light in lines you can model with ease. Third, the process that names, measures, and shares is sturdy. The community that listens is large. The cadence of nightly counts is slow enough to sleep beside. There is a temptation to stare into the gaps between rails, looking for steps that aren't there. I resist it by remembering scale. Even when tales stretch millions of kilometers, their substance is so thin that our best vacuum chambers are crowded by comparison. Even when geometry lines up neatly, the line is a sketch on a map of great emptiness, more about where eyes point than where forces meet. Even when a number twitches, brightness up a half magnitude, position off a small fraction of an arc minute, the first place to lean is the railing marked check again, not the jump toward something new. Facts do not forbid wonder. They hold it steady. Knowing that ʻOumuamua's small acceleration was measured at the level of a few micro-g makes me breathe easier, not because small numbers are inherently calming, but because they show how sensitive our tools are, how gracefully perception has stretched into the dark. Knowing that Borisov's perihelion was beyond Earth's orbit tells me most visitors will sketch their stories at safe remove, which is the kind of sentence a pillow likes. Knowing that 3i will be earned, not assumed, tells me patience is the path down these stairs, one hand on the wood, 1 foot below the other, never hurried. In the second half of the night I carry one long unbroken thought, like a continuous rail along a landing, that the pair of cases we have already lived through, one lean and enigmatic, one classic and generous, are enough to span a fair portion of possibility for the next thing we meet, and that within that span lies a wide territory of calm outcomes in which the differences we will someday discuss over coffee and papers belong to the laboratory and the long lens, while the similarities we can trust tonight belong to the soft physics of distance and the competent routines of people who watch skies for a living. And because both of those tiers are firm, the only leap required of you is from wakefulness to rest. History's railing is smooth with use. I keep my grip light and let it guide the pace. 3 points of contact: ʻOumuamua, Borisov, and the numbered promise that another will come and be handled with the same care, are enough to walk this staircase in the dark without a stumble. Down one more step, and one more after that, we reach the landing where instruments breathe, screens dim, and the night holds still. The imager saves and blinks. The spectrograph ticks once. Begin with a green that isn't neon. A softened hue, like the memory of spring pressed between pages. It shows up in long exposures first, then, if the night is dark and the sky is steady, in a faint wash around the visitor's head. That green is a signature of simple molecules singing under sunlight, tiny carbon pairs and oxygen atoms releasing light as they calm. Follow that thread of colour and the scene becomes simpler, not stranger. Comets often wear their green near the centre. Diatomic carbon glows in swan bands that sit in the green part of vision, and cameras love them. Oxygen can add a delicate green line when atoms shed energy set loose by sunlight. The two contributions overlap like watercolour, not like paint laid thick. What the eye reads is a whisper of colour that says, gas is present, light is at work, and nothing here is in a hurry. Look outward from the core, and the colour thins. Carbon pairs break apart downstream. Oxygen's quick green gives way to paler tones. The tail becomes less a colour and more a value, silver softened toward grey, because dust reflects broadly while gas chooses notes. That is why so many photographs show a mint halo close in and a neutral veil beyond. The physics is kindly that way, intense near the lamp, ordinary in the hallway. Elsewhere in the sky there is a different green that belongs to Earth itself. High above the weather, oxygen at the edge of space glows at a narrow shade that painters could not mix by guessing. On some nights, the air makes its own faint curtain of that hue, a background whisper called air glow, and imagers learn to recognize it so they don't attribute our planet's blush to a visitor. It's a friendly background, a reminder that color is also local. Red joins the story more softly. In the high, thin air, oxygen can release a warm red, and when the sun is busy, auroral arcs write that red above the polar dark. Cameras notice it readily. Human eyes catch it when the night is very clear. Out among comets, reds arise too, but not like nebulae glowing from hydrogen. They are quieter signs in spectra and in the long tails of dust that scatter a little more on the warm end than the cool. The point of this palette is not to impress. It is to reassure. The shades we see have names, causes, and calm behavior. Under the lamp of the sun, chemistry steps forward in small, patient moves. Light shakes a molecule. A bond loosens. A fragment calms by emitting a specific colour. The choices are few and familiar, and that familiarity is a comfort. When you see a green core in a well-exposed frame, you can say to yourself, sunlight and simple carbon at work. And when you see the halo fade to grey, you can say, dust taking over, as expected. There is no call in these colours to brace or doubt. They are the steady alphabet of thin gases and scattered grains. Keep the colour thread running through the room. A tiny green charging light across the way lowers to a softer tint as your eyes adjust. The ceiling picks up a trace of street lamp amber and lets it go. Your own sense of colour desaturates in the near dark, the cones resting while rods take the watch, which is one reason the night feels gentler as it deepens. The sky obeys these same rules of perception. Every astrophotographer has learned to leave generous time for dark adaptation, and every sleeper knows the truth beneath that practice. Vision quiets, breath steadies, and edges round off into tones. When the visitor rotates, jets bring fresh gas into sunlight, and the green can pulse a little before easing back. Cameras catch the rise and fall, eyes usually not. That is as it should be. The delicate things are measured by tools and turned into curves, while the body absorbs the larger impression. A soft ring near the core, a tapering wash downstream, colours that promise explanation rather than alarm. You are allowed to let the instruments keep up the ledger while you keep the story simple. Some nights carry extra colour in the air we look through. Thin cirrus scatters reds from distant towns. Volcanic dust reddens sunsets and leaves a warm aftertaste hours later. Good observers annotate these conditions so they do not mistake sky paint for comet paint, and the habit itself is soothing. List the tint, note the trace, accept the correction, because it turns seeing into care rather than chase. That same care works indoors. Dim a screen, shade a lamp, give your room a kinder palette, and the mind follows. I like a single long thought to rest inside, so let it be this. The green that cameras love near a comet's center is the modest light of small molecules finishing a brief excitement. The red that sometimes appears in our own high air is the high, slow breath of oxygen above the world, and the grey that fills the long tail is dust taking the colour of the sun and returning it without flourish, which together make a palette so spare and comprehensible that you can trust it to stay within its lines while you sleep. And if a frame tomorrow shows more green or less, the change will sit inside this same language of light. A short note in a familiar key that tells the same calm story in a slightly different shade. If the alignment ahead brings anything to the eye, it will likely be more of this. A central green, soft and close, a tail in patient grayscale reaching away, a sky whose own faint tints drift in and out on their schedule. That is a good picture to carry to the edge of sleep. Imagine it now, a small, gentle glow touched with mint, laid on a charcoal field, stretched by grey that fades until it is indistinguishable from night. Hold that image until the colours surrender to darkness, and the darkness becomes kind. The halo loosens like mist, and I let the quiet carry it. Come with me on a slow walk. We start at the desk by the window, where a small notebook holds dates, sky clarity, and a simple sketch of the field. A pencil mark for the visitor's place tonight, a gentler mark for last night, and a margin note about the faint companion star that helps with centering. This is the first step. Quiet logging, the kind that keeps future nerves from having to guess. A few steps carry us to the backyard, where a modest mount hums and then goes still. A short exposure shows a smudge, a longer one shows motion. I write the time, the exposure length, the air mass, and the guessed magnitude if the image allows it. After the shutter rests, the data join a folder named for the date, and the folder waits. None of this is urgent. Steps like these gain meaning because they are repeated. We walk down the lane to a wider path where other small notebooks live. People you'll never meet under darker skies, doing the same thing with their own care. They send their measurements to a shared ledger where comet watchers collect estimates and curves. Names differ. One group hosts visual magnitudes, another compiles CCD measures, but the rhythm is the same. Stamp, send, rest. Later, a composite light curve grows from these steps as surely as footprints show a path after a fresh dusting. Another block, another gate. Here the measurements take the crisp form of positions against the stars. A few arc seconds matter, so times are exact and coordinates careful. These go to the place. That keeps orbits. For decades, it has received such steps from mountaintops and city roofs, and from professional mirrors as well, and it returns a track to walk by, where to point tomorrow, what the uncertainties are, and how much each new pair of numbers narrows the way. Past that gate is a crossroads with signposts to many routes. One route leads to the service that prints ephemerides on demand. It drinks the orbit and hands you directions precise enough to thread a narrow field. Another route leads to survey archives, where wide-field cameras look night after night and mark changes with software that never sleeps. If the visitor appears in this record, the frames lend context to our local steps. If it doesn't, that absence has meaning too. The walk remains unhurried either way. A turn takes us up the hill to mid-sized telescopes run by small teams. They add spectra, colour indices, and sharper astrometry when weather and time permit. We pause at the threshold. The rooms here are dim, and the talk is low. But the work is kin to what we began at the desk. The difference is scale, not soul. A spectrograph turns light into a line. A photometer turns brightness into a curve. And in both, the same patient habit rules. Repeat, compare, confirm, breathe. We continue along a quiet ridge where distant facilities live in clean air. Large mirrors watch while dawn crawls up a far slope. On some nights they make room for a short look. A deeper image to steady the fainter end of the curve. A high-resolution spectrum to test for gas. The steps are longer strides on the same path, and the path is easier to trust for having stones this firm. I keep our pace steady, because the scale of a mirror does not change what sleep needs from the sky. Here the lane meets a paved road that climbs toward orbit. Spacecraft keep watch beyond the wind and weather, and their feeds become part of our walk, not because they stare at the visitor constantly, but because they glance at the sun and the space between, and those glances tell us what the environment is doing on the day we care about. If a gust is due, we will see its timing. If the field is quiet, we will see that too. Knowing either lets our footsteps stay even. We pass a small sign for wide dish antennas that listen for brief, bright chatter from the universe. Most of their work ranges far beyond our local story, yet their logs are another path we might stroll on a night when attention wants company. If a transient appears from a certain patch of sky, someone will write a short bulletin and others will check. The act of checking is itself a steadying step, an agreement to walk the route with light rather than run ahead with guesses. Just beyond is a gentle slope toward polar latitudes, where cameras and magnetometers keep the long watch. Their traces draw lines that swell and settle through the night. On evenings when the solar wind brushes Earth more strongly, those lines arch higher. When the wind softens, the lines relax. These traces too are steps, each minute a measured pace, so that later we can say what the night was like around the time we looked elsewhere. None of it insists on attention while you rest. It only keeps the path clear. We have covered some distance without leaving the room. That is the comfort of this kind of walk, that the path is made of small, repeatable actions that add up. Make a frame, write a time, send a point, read a curve, fold in a bulletin, glance at an index, then return to breath and pillow, because the value lies not in any single stride, but in the way many quiet steps align into a map that future eyes will trust when they retrace tonight's route to ask what was seen and how it changed, and whether the change was in the sky or in the air or in the instrument, or in the way a dozen careful people wrote down what they noticed and agreed later on which parts sang true. Turn with me down a narrow walk shaded by memory. Past visits left markers here, old papers, clean plots, a note about a fragment that brightened, then faded. touching those markers doesn't commit us to any plot. It only reminds us that paths like this have been walked before, and that the ground holds. It also reminds us that novelty tends to announce itself by surviving re-measurement, not by first impression. So we stroll, not sprint. We let the ledger fill. We keep our steps small and regular. At the end of this block, a small light marks an archive door. Inside, data wait in neat rows, astrometry formatted in a standard column order, photometry labelled with filters and apertures, spectra tagged with exposure times and wavelength solutions. You and I don't need to enter. Knowing the door is there is enough. The presence of a place where records live makes the rest of the walk easier to finish without peering into every window. Trust grows well in communities that keep good ledgers and share them freely, and that trust is one more gentle step toward sleep. We return by a level path. The desk comes back into view. The notebook rests where we left it. The pencil lies across the margin as if it, too, had paused for breath. If tomorrow brings a clearer frame or a cleaner curve, it will join the walk in the same order. Local note, shared ledger, refined path, wider look, environmental context, and back to rest. If tomorrow brings clouds, the route shortens and nothing breaks. The road through the night remains passable. The speed limit is always slow. I stop where the hallway meets the bedroom and let the last image hold. A small mark in a book, a line on a chart, a timestamp in a file. Each one a step that is easy to take and easier to repeat. Each one part of a route so well known that it feels like walking home in dusk light, knowing every crack in the sidewalk and every safe turn, and confident that the door will be where it always is when you reach out your hand. Which is why we can end the evening here at the threshold of a restful room and rest a palm on the frame. I'm writing this to you as the room settles. Not a lecture, not a briefing, just a note from a steady hand offered at the quiet edge of the day. You've walked far enough through ideas for now. Let me fold them, smooth them once, and leave them where they can warm you while you drift. Here is the first fold. You are safe tonight. The visitor we've been following stays far beyond any reach that matters to the body. Telescopes love such distances. The heart, sensibly, does not notice them. Earth's own defences are old and reliable, a layered cloth held taut around us by the planet's magnetic frame and atmosphere. Charged breath from the sun strikes that outer cloth and slides along the seams toward the poles, where it becomes light instead of harm. That is the design. It has served through uncounted nights. Here is the second fold. Quiet work continues, whether you watch or sleep. Instruments will stitch fresh lines of data into the day's fabric, and in the morning the pattern will be clearer. Your part is lighter. Breathe in to the count of a slow 4. Breathe out to a slower 6, and think of that breath as the thread that binds the moment to the next. Nothing rushes the stitch. Nothing tears the cloth. There's a question I sometimes hear whispered. What if we're missing something? It's an honest question, born of curiosity and the strange wideness of space. The answer that lets the shoulders drop is simple. When we miss a stitch, it shows. The seam puckers a little, and the community takes it out and sews it again with steadier hands. The pattern is resilient because many hands know it. You are not the only one tending this quilt. A memory might tug at the edge of the blanket, some headline, some excited voice. Let it pass, kindly. Excitement is a loose thread that doesn't need pulling right now. We have two good layers beneath us: what has been measured and what experience says is most likely. Those layers do not leave much room for a surprise that changes your night. Surprises that do come are almost always small, and caught by needles meant for small things. I promised a single metaphor, and I'm keeping it. Everything tonight is cloth. The comet's faint coma is a gauze laid over a black field. The tail is a long selvage running anti-sunward, neat and spare. Geometry is the loom. Light is the shuttle. Even our cautions are stitches you make without thinking. Silencing a notification, dimming a screen, turning your face slightly from a draft. Worn habits, strong seams. When you feel wakefulness snag, it helps to name 3 pieces of the fabric around you. The weight of the cover across your midriff. The cool hem where your wrist meets air. The slight nap of the pillowcase under your cheek. None of these are opinions. All are present facts. Noticing them tacks your thoughts to the cloth of the room, and thoughts that are tacked down do not billow. If you'd like a rule of thumb to keep, take this one. Close is what you can touch. The visitor is not close. Numbers tell us so. Astronomical units and measured speeds and angles you never have to memorize because someone who loves numbers keeps them straight. The only distances that matter here are hand to quilt, quilt to skin, skin to breath. Those you can measure by feel. On some nights, the mind resists, hunting for an unfinished seam to fret. It imagines patterns where there are none, or magnifies small motifs until they fill the whole cloth. I do the simplest thing I know. I give it a better pattern to trace. A square of observation, a square of explanation, a square of humility about what we don't yet know. Repeat those 3 until the mind tires of neatness and lets the quilt lie flat again. There is deep relief in tidy repetition. You've heard me name our 2 previous visitors. Their threads run through this piece not as alarms, but as reinforcement. One was spare and enigmatic, one generous and textbook, and both were hemmed by distance and by physics we already teach to children with a lamp and a bead on a string. New cloth will be cut from the same bolt. The colors will vary. The weave will not. Holding that thought lightly is enough. Let me place a longer line here, the kind that lies like a broad band across a coverlet, so your attention can rest on it without effort, because the truth it carries is both simple and sufficient. Under the steady pressure of sunlight, ices loosen, gases lift, grains drift, and the faint glow that results is stitched across space in a pattern we have learned to read with patience and to mend with better measurements when a stitch slips. And while this learning is earnest and ongoing and sometimes surprising, its surprises almost never concern the human scale of sleep and warmth and breath, which means you are free to leave the pattern to the weavers tonight and let the fabric do what fabric has done for as long as people have lain down at the end of a day and trusted the cover over them to stay put until morning. If tomorrow brings talk of aurora, consider it fringe on the polar edge of the planet's cloak. Beautiful, not binding. If it brings a cleaner image of the comet's head, consider it a new square in the sampler. If it brings nothing at all, that is also a result. And the quiet panels are what make the bright ones readable. Most science is quiet panels, most nights too. I am here to make room for that quiet. To remind you that I don't know yet is not a loose end, but an honest seam waiting its turn, and that we checked again is the strongest stitch we have. When you grant yourself the same courtesy, I'll think on that later, I'll rest now. You become part of the good practice, because well-rested minds sow straighter lines. If the hour is late, loosen the jaw, and let the tongue rest high and wide, as if it were a soft piece of cloth settling into its place. That one change tells the breath the workshop is closing. Shoulders follow, hands soften, eyes sink a fraction deeper. You're not finishing anything. You're laying the work on the table and turning down the lamp. The fabric keeps, the pattern waits, the needle will be where you left it. A last thought, folded small and left near your hand. The universe does not require you to hold it together. It already holds. What it asks, if it asks anything, is that you notice a little, learn a little, and rest when it is time. You have done the first two today. The third is a gift to yourself and to the work you'll take up again. Steadier, under kinder light. You can rest here. I'm right beside you. Night shift is a room made of gentle light. Screens dim to charcoal with soft blue fonts. A red status LED breathes once every few seconds like a bedside beacon. The slit display shows a narrow rectangle of darker night. Someone's mug leaves a dry ring near the keyboard. I keep my voice low, so the brightness does most of the talking. Because in a lab, at this hour, light is the language, and every instrument answers in a shade. A finder panel glows the colour of distant dawn. The field sits where horizons said it would. Guide stars sparkle as tiny pale pins. The target rides between them as a warmer dot that lengthens slightly when I widen the stretch. That is the game of this hour, coaxing faint, from fainter, using nothing more than careful contrast. Long before numbers settle into tables, a human eye leans into the dark and reads softness and edge, glow and gradient. The lesson is familiar and kind. Most of what we need is already here, waiting to be seen without hurry. Around the room, indicator strips blink at tempos we barely notice. The cooler's display holds at a low temperature. The dome controller's bar paints a slow sweep when the slit follows the mount. A green power light at the spectrograph's base refuses to change, which is precisely what you want at 2 a.m. The sky outside contributes its own quiet. A planet skims the horizon with a cream-coloured sparkle, and the visitor's region is still a deeper black, better for the soft blue fonts and their steady assurances. Breaking news does not belong to this hour. Quiet confirmations do. An alert window whispers that tonight's ephemeris matched within its uncertainty. A log from the survey pipelines trickles in with new tracklets that look just like the last. The magnetometer line hums along a shallow path that would be a straight edge if plotted on paper. None of this would make a headline, and that is the comfort. The night is doing what nights are supposed to do, keeping the story tidy beneath small lamps. I tilt the camera's readout to a darker theme. A fresh exposure appears as a rectangle of midnight with bright flecks. A faint smear where the target moved. Across the chip becomes a short line when I stack a handful of frames, flip the axes, and the line turns back into a point with a tail that aligns as expected. Every operation adds or subtracts a little light, and each decision is a whisper. Show less, see more, show more, risk noise, step back, trust the curve. The room's glow holds me to patience. On a shelf, a hand torch rests under red cellophane. We keep it there for cable checks, for the short walk to the weather station, for the small emergencies that are usually no emergencies at all. Red is the compromise every observer learns. Just enough light to see the next motion, not enough to erase the night from your eyes. A good compromise is like a steady breath. It settles the pulse and gives the work its slow radius. Across the hall, another screen keeps the space weather picture humming. Solar wind speed sits in a gentle band. The field angle drifts without drama. If the trace drops or rises later, we will see it in time to add a line to the log. But for now, the photons we catch have crossed calm roads. Elsewhere, a list of scheduled radio checks idles, ready to record a quiet sky as faithfully as a loud one. Quiet can be data-rich. Silence can be a complete sentence. Absence, when measured, is as much a colour as presence. The lab's small lights turn tools into constellations, a silver knob with a star of reflections, an eyepiece ringed with a thin, moon-like arc, the curved edge of a monitor lit like a crescent. I watch the visitor's signal slowly improve as air steadies. I watch the histogram as it lifts a little on the left, a little on the right, and stays sensibly flat in the middle. It is the kind of display you see in your mind's eye after you close your lids, a memory of shapes in the dark transposed into sleep. That is this room's secret. Its light is gentle enough to carry into dreaming without glare. A message pings from a remote collaborator and resolves into a single line. Positions match, tail angle as predicted. We do not trade exclamation points. The lab has different punctuation. A saved file is a period. A plotted point is a comma. A new flat field is a clean line break. Where a rumour would demand a crowd, a measurement requests only a label and a place to sit. The taxonomy of small lamps favours nouns over adjectives, figures over fervour. I let one long breath glide beneath the longer exposure, and the room answers with the softest chorus. Cooler fans hidden under cabinet light, a distant relay with a firefly blink. The almost not there glow above the keyboard that keeps my hands located in the sense of a pilot feeling for switches by their shapes. And the thought that fills the space between those small lights is bigger than it feels, that this late practice of adjusting brightness and trusting faint signal and giving the sky time to express itself without being forced is not only how we keep the record honest, but how we teach our bodies to step down from the day and let the mind's own luminance dim to the level where sleep can find a path across the floor and the instruments can keep watch without us needing to, because they are very good at it, and they were built for exactly that kindness. The stack finishes, the frame writes to disk, a gentle blue check mark settles at the corner. I jot the time and the air mass and the seeing in a guideline of pale lines. The mouse pointer rests. The red LED breathes. A night shift lab can feel like a lantern in a cave, but it is, in truth, a lantern on a porch. The world beyond is wide and slow. The light here is for comfort and for craft. You can turn away and it will still burn at the same low wattage, doing what it does until morning. We leave the screen in its dim theme and the telescope in its last position. The dome closes by increments, each sliver of exterior black, becoming interior black, then grey, then a soft black again as the motor stops and the panels meet. The log file closes on a line that does not need flourish. I touch the phone's brightness down 2 more taps and put it face down on the desk. This is how a night shift ends, in a place that listens to light. by lowering the light until listening and resting are the same act. At 0326, the status bars settle. The LEDs pause their small pulse. The lab keeps its quiet glow while the rest of the building sleeps. You can let the story settle now. The visitor kept a quiet course. Instruments listened and found what they expected. A faint head, a tail that leaned away from the sun, small changes governed by light and distance. Earth's field did its old, reliable work, turning charged breath toward the poles and leaving most of the world to rest. Surveys stitched their nightly frames, ephemerides stayed true within their margin, logs filled with times and magnitudes and calm notes. Across the chapters, the same steady pieces repeated. Light arrives first and says how bright the halo is and what color small molecules choose. Dust follows ordinary rules and curves into a pale fan. The ion wake points outward and can reset when the sun's wind shifts. When geometry lines up neatly, it sharpens our view more than our lives. History gives us two rails already worn smooth, one dry and enigmatic traveller, one classic, generous comet. A third will be handled in the same way, measured, compared, shared. In rooms like this one, late lamps dim and screens turn down. Numbers wait without insisting. If a night brings aurora, it is a distant fringe on the planet's own cloak. If a night brings nothing at all, that is the common and welcome case. Quiet panels make bright panels legible. Thank you for staying with the gentle parts, the parts that are patient and clear. The universe does not demand wakefulness from us to keep its courses. It helps when we rest. Let the shoulders soften. Let the jaw grow easy. Let the breath slow to a rhythm you don't have to count. Somewhere, a dome is closing with care, files are saving, and the sky continues in its slow, comprehensible way. Good night. Sleep warm. The lights can stay low now.